Okay, guys, we're going to get going. So I'm Rebecca Richmond Cohen. I'm a lecturer at the law school. I teach media advocacy and media literacy, and I'm also a documentary filmmaker. And welcome to this panel on documentary filmmaker alums. We're missing two panelists who I hope will be here shortly, one because of technical difficulties. But we are a very diverse group of filmmakers in terms of experiences and careers. Some of us have produced one film, some of us have produced more than 30, is that right? Films ranging from NASCAR to NRA to international humanitarian law to Tyson Chicken. Some of us have been practicing lawyers, some of us have never taken the bar, but all of us, I think, are deeply committed to storytelling. So I'll let all the panelists introduce themselves. I think they'll have more interesting ways to frame their careers than I would reading their bios. But we can just go down the row and talk a little bit about your filmmaking career and your experience if you practiced law or other things you've done in your career, and if there are any labels you would give yourself as a documentary filmmaker, as an artist, as an activist, as a journalist, if there are labels you would use to help describe your career as a documentarian.
Fair enough. My name's Mike Weiser. I graduated from the law school in 2003 and pretty much went straight into making films for the PBS series Frontline, which is what I've been doing ever since. So I'm the one that has probably had more than 30 films. We make 2 or 3 films a year. Most of the films that we make tend to be political films, though not exclusively. We showed a film today that was about the NFL. But a lot of our films are trying to tell the story about what happens in Washington, who the personalities are, who are the players behind the big stories that you see on the news, and trying to sort of connect the dots behind what has happened. I'd say that the 2 labels I probably would be most connected to would be writer and journalist. I'm, on most of our films, a co-writer and producer. And so I think that the storytelling part of my job is an important one. And it's been a real privilege to be able to make the films that I've gotten to do. Just to give you a sense of the types of stories that we've done, when I graduated, most of the films that we started making were about the Iraq War, which happened just as I was graduating, and about the Bush administration, about the Bush administration's torture policies, interrogation policies, some of the legal elements behind what happened in the Bush administration. We made a number of films about the financial crisis. We made a number of films during the Obama years about the divisions inside the country. We just had a 4-hour miniseries called Divided States of America. And now we're sort of deep into the Trump world and just made a film about Steve Bannon. And they're working now on 2 hours about Vladimir Putin.
Thanks. Adam Stofsky, class of 2004. Are we 3, 4, 5? No, you're 7. Okay, it's gonna come. Anyway, it was close. So I actually practiced law for 5 years. I clerked for the Ninth Circuit, and then I don't want to just recite my resume, but there is some context here. And then I was a litigator at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law in D.C. for a couple of years, doing a mix of Katrina relief, the legal response to Katrina, and employment discrimination work. And then I went to a firm. Sorry, Judy. I went to a firm for about a year and a half until the financial crisis hit, and there was nothing to do. So I quit that job to start a human rights organization called the New Media Advocacy Project, which I led for 7 years until last year, where I transitioned to that organization and now run a new startup called Briefly, which is both NMAP and Briefly are video and media-oriented organizations. NMAP, which is really what I'll be talking about today primarily, is very much a sort of legal-oriented human rights organization, and we integrate video and storytelling into human rights legal advocacy with the goal of winning cases and achieving very concrete results in human rights campaigns. So to date, we've produced over 400 videos, actually, in approximately about 70 different campaigns or projects, all with human rights NGOs all around the world, mostly small and medium-sized NGOs. And you know, it's interesting. Most of our videos are documentary-like, but they're not really documentaries. They're really advocacy videos, and they're designed for very specific audiences, designed for very specific goals, not necessarily to be the best told story in the conventional sense. So I guess then the labels I'd give myself in my career are kind of very much lawyer, kind of in contrast to Mike's. I forgot what he said. It was writer. Yeah. So I don't think of myself as a writer or a filmmaker. I'm a lawyer who makes movies to kind of do lawyerly things better, basically. And the other label I'd give myself is kind of tinkerer, because I feel like both in NMAP and also my current enterprise, where we're using video and storytelling to make legal information more accessible to consumers and business owners here in the US, just kind of always tinkering with the way video and storytelling can be used to persuade or to educate.
Thanks. I'm Rebecca Richmond-Cohen. Class of 2007. Before law school, I'd been an assistant editor. I worked for Michael Moore on Bowling for Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11, and came to law school very unsure about what I was doing here, and continued to make short films when I was a law school student, and then graduated and started to produce and direct both feature-length documentaries and also short-form advocacy projects. Now I teach a reading group on human rights and documentary here at the law school, and a seminar on called Seeing Criminal Justice, about the interplay between visual storytelling and criminal law, including how video is used as evidence, but also how video can be used as a tool for advocacy. I would give myself a number of labels, often that I find very conflicting and conflicted. I do at times see myself as a journalist, and at times see myself as an advocate, and do sometimes find tension between those two roles, which is something we explore in the classroom, and something I'd be interested to explore on this panel. I'm also an advisor to the Harvard Law Documentary Studio that yes, Desta and Sam will talk more about. For 3 years, I've partnered with different clinics at the law school, producing short-form advocacy videos, sometimes used as evidence in litigation, sometimes used to help pass legislation, and so have combined law and film in these ways.
Hi, I'm Adam Hutnick, and I guess I'm thrilled to hear that there's a documentary studio at Harvard Law School. That's amazing. I remember when I first started. Hi, Lacey. When I was first out doing production stuff, it was I think it was one of the first times that the Low Income Protection Plan first started. They would first start considering non-specifically legal jobs. So what I was doing in production, the fact that was a new thing then. So the fact that now there's actual production within the law school is amazing. That's really cool to hear. In any case, so I was class of 2001. I interned in the South African Parliament while I was here after my first year, and then went back to do a winter term writing project there. And my civil procedure professor, Martha Minow, told me, you know, if you go back there, you should take a camera. And so that kind of stuck with me. It took a little while, but I ended up, after taking the bar, working in cable news for a little bit at MSNBC. My first day of work there was September 4th, 2001. So what I thought was going to be a sort of documentary-focused role there turned out to be something very different, and then ended up at MTV during the Iraq War period. So did a lot of, in the news and docs group at MTV, so did a lot of youth-centered storytelling around soldiers preparing to deploy, did kind of primers on what were the arguments for and against this war, that kind of stuff, and then left MTV, thought it was a leave of absence at the time to go shoot this film following young Israelis on across the religious and political spectrum during the Gaza withdrawal in 2005. That became a film called Unsettled, and that was my first doc feature. And then I did not go back to MTV because I had to finish that film. And that took longer than expected, and then stayed independent, and over the last several years have done a combination of mostly documentary-oriented, but commercials and branded stuff, as well as a number of features. The last few years, there's been a lot of sports-oriented stuff. I did a film called Judging Jewel that was part of the ESPN 30 for 30 series on Richard Jewell, the security guard who found the bomb at the Atlanta Olympics in '96, and then was subsequently accused of being the bomber, and it's sort of his story. Did another one called Son of the Congo that was about an NBA player named Serge Ibaka, who I went back to Congo with him, and it was kind of like, you know, seeing what it's like to leave and come back as Elvis, and try to figure out what he could do to, if anything, to make life any better where he came from, and kind of just seeing that experience. And then most recently I did a film called What Carter Lost that just came out on ESPN last month that is about the team you don't know from Friday Night Lights, a black middle-class high school team that is maybe the best high school football team of all time, but was played that year under a cloud of suspicion, maybe warranted, maybe not, and then had several players on that team after winning a state title and sort of vindicating the community, then go commit a series of sort of inexplicable crimes. So that's the Carter story, and now I'm sort of on vacation. Happy to be here.
Should we jump back, or?
You keep on going. I'm catching up a little bit.
Okay.
You didn't labor yourself.
Filmmaker, human.
I'm Sam Kaplowitz, and I am a recent graduate, so I definitely have the shortest CV of the table, and actually feel really honored to be here because I'm sitting at a table with people who I want to be, and are all people who have helped me think about film and advocacy as I've come through law school and entered into my first job afterward, which is working for Human Rights Watch as a fellow, a Satter Fellow from the Human Rights Program here. And there I have been focusing on media advocacy around the laws of war, the international humanitarian laws, specifically in Syria, and producing films that try to advocate for some sort of change, normally with the UN, with a body at the UN, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. And while I was here, I was the president of the Harvard Law Documentary Studio for 2 years, and helped produce a bunch of films there, and made a film myself. Yeah.
And can you guys give an introduction to the Doc Studio?
Yeah,
or maybe Desta.
I'll do it. I can do it. Hi, I'm Desta Ref. Maybe I'll start with, I kind of entered into like the documentary world through law school. It seemed a really good way to kind of pair, like I had filmmaking skills from before, like I'd worked in independent film before I came to law school. And then while at law school, it just seemed kind of a natural pairing with, you know, we're focused on sort of persuasive communication, and the easiest way to do that is through story. So while I was here with a group of other students, we helped to start the Harvard Law and Documentary Studio, which is a student-run. I mean, it's based in the law school, but it's open to like all campuses. And we actually have had some Harvard alumni do pieces too, which is helping students make documentaries. They don't have to be advocacy. A lot of them are like kind of coming through law school, and it's pairing them with equipment, pairing them with training, pairing them with mentors in order to create. Most of it are just like short form docs, and we've done really cool topics. I mean, I don't know what's done recently, but we've taken on immigration. I did one on vision loss. I mean, we even did one on, I remember, breast milk. So it was just like a really cool like gamut of things. So I did a lot of, while I was at law school, doing a lot of short form documentaries, a lot around advocacy. And then I spent the last 3 years in the Mississippi Delta doing the Harvard Mississippi Delta Fellowship, where I used sort of videos and docs as a tool. I mean, almost like I did a little bit of work, but I actually feel like the skills I learned through like making documentaries and creating documentaries really helped me, and I applied those, especially because a large component of my work was doing like state policy advocacy and using those skills in sort of my state advocacy was really useful. And now I write for TV. So I would call myself as a writer, a visual advocate, and I'm a mom. So a mom.
Lacey, so the question is to introduce yourself, your career, including if you did practice law and have a legal background, and a label you would give yourself to the kind of filmmaker you are: advocate, journalist, activist, human.
Oh, cool. Hi, so my name is Lacey Schwartz. I label myself as a writer, director, producer, and I do strategy and consulting as well. I call myself an impact filmmaker, and I have a production company. Actually, my business partner was one of my closest friends here, but she was in medical school. So we have a very multidisciplinary background, and she has about a million other degrees as well that kind of feed into that, in particular, a master's in public health. And so we look at it as like we create the strongest content we can, engaging, entertaining, et cetera, but usually around, not topically about an issue, but usually a narrative that hits on an issue, and then we do big outreach, impact campaigns around that, and then sometimes the third piece of it is the strategy consulting piece, where we'll go even deeper into an issue and continue on with it as well. So those are kind of like the three arms of the ways that we work. And my kind of HLS journey into filmmaking was that when I was I decided, when I first got here, and I'm sad I missed something like that 1L paper chasey stuff, because I was very, to me, I was kind of showed up and felt like Harvard Law School is so storied, but it didn't feel like many places, it didn't feel like the experience that I was having was being reflected in those stories that many people read when they get to Harvard Law School. And so I felt very compelled to pick up a camera and film what our experience really was like. And so I got permission to do a third-year film instead of a third-year paper, and then got permission while I was here. In order to know how to do that, I took a class at Visual Environmental Studies with Rob Moss, who's an awesome documentary filmmaker and definitely one of like the top 5 people that changed my life. And so I loved doing it. Like, honestly, I was really struggling to make myself read case law, but had no problem staying up all night and editing. And so that was a real moment for myself in terms of being like, oh, this is what I can forget what I like or intellectually, this is what I can do. My first summer after law school, I went to ACLU of Southern California, and I loved the work, but then when they told me to write a brief, I literally couldn't get through it. And it was like this moment of like, it's not the romance of it, like this is the reality, and anything you do is going to be a hustle, and it's going to be a lot of grunt work, and what am I actually going to be able to make myself do? And so that was a huge moment for me. And so, actually, I just had told this 10 seconds ago, but like the lip experience was very, very big for me, because I was like, well, I think I want to do production. I really want to do this. I don't really want to practice. And so I built a relationship with Lip, and they agreed to like give me Lip, because I felt like what I was doing was public interest related in terms of some projects I wanted to work on. I think I met you, Adam, because I saw your name in the Lip book, and I reached out to you, right? That's like how, because I literally was like, I'm really into like reading all the manuals, so it come up, I'm like, what is everybody else doing on Lip? And it was like everybody else was doing whatever they were doing, except for Adam and I, who was like listed as filmmakers. So I was like, I'm definitely going to reach out to him. And we developed a relationship. And so that was kind of how I launched into it. So when I graduated and realized, okay, I'm going to try to do this, I did a lot of things, and I was still on the fence about what I wanted to do. And I ended up, I really was like, do I want to go into a mailroom? I went with a lawyer to like rep films at Sundance. I was waiting tables. People were like, what are you doing? And I decided that I went into a production company and I worked in development for a bunch of years, and I kind of had more of like a consulting day job doing development in like a big production company, and then I went and did TV day-to-day work. But I always had projects that I was doing behind the scenes, like on my own, and it got to the point where I started getting funding for those, and it was too hard to do it. And so I, at that point, kind of launched my company, which allowed me to take on consulting and go out on my own, which is what I've been doing now for over 10 years. So in terms of the work that I do both scripted and documentaries, and I made a personal film that I just showed called Little White Lie that is about my experience with dual identity and family secrets. That was a PBS documentary and did a lot of all sorts of different levels of screening. And it was about my story of growing up in a white Jewish family in upstate New York and finding out at the age of 18 that my biological father was black. But as an example of the kind of work I do, we then took that project and we created an online and offline game around it, using quotes from the film to help other people to share their little white lies. And we do a lot of work around identity and family secrets, and have done like tons of partnerships with both like mental health organizations and identity organizations, organizations that talk about race, and I do a lot of Jewish diversity work. So that's kind of like the larger extension and example. Another film we did is a film called Defret, which is a scripted film, but it's based on a true story about two courageous women who fought actually against the legal system in Ethiopia. And that film, we showed it Sundance and Berlin and screened in 22 countries worldwide, but then we also did a huge project around that, around child marriage. And a lot of like activist work, working with big organizations that work on that. And now I'm working on a bunch of different projects. We're producing a documentary. It's in development with American Masters about black female performers and how they were activists on and off the stage and screen before, during, and after the civil rights movement. It's actually, we've optioned a book called How It Feels to Be Free. And we're doing a digital documentary series on the generation of biracial black and white people born after the Loving decision for a production company. So we do kind of a mix of like short, long form, scripted documentaries. We just optioned a book to turn it into a fiction film that I'm writing now. So it's a real mix.
Cool. So we don't have to go down the row anymore, but so I'm going to open this up to a discussion of the panelists. But we all make documentaries, and we all make very different kinds of documentaries. But it's actually sort of a hard question to ask what a documentary is. And I'm wondering if we can get a working definition on this panel of what it is that we're making when we make documentaries.
I guess if I'm at the end, I'll start. I mean, I think that the essential things that define what we do, because we operate in the space that's also journalism, so we can sort of consider ourselves to be journalists, but the films that we make at Frontline are really at their heart documentaries that I think share in some ways more with the documentary realm than with the journalism realm. And I think that what documentaries do that other types of news aren't able to do is to really tell a story, and they're obviously fact-based, is part of the definition of a documentary, but you're able to do something that you can't do in 5 minutes because you're able to connect with the people behind the story, what motivates them, why it happened, to get a real understanding of the events that affect you. I think especially in the world that we live in today, with Twitter, with the pace of news, where everything is breaking and stories are happening all of the time, it's very easy to get lost as to where did this come from? What is the story behind what is happening? Just as an example, I mentioned that the last film that we made was called Divided States of America. And it was a film looking back at the Obama years and at the decisions that were made, not just in the White House, but also inside the Republican Party over those 8 years, really over the 9 years since Obama was a candidate. and how those decisions played out, and how decisions made inside the leadership of the Republican Party played out all the way up to the candidate, Donald Trump, who ends up running last year. And I think that's really rare in the media environment that we have now, to be able to have that amount of time, to be able to pull together a story, a long-form story, to be able to, as I think, connect the dots, and really also understand the characters and the people behind something that you might see in the news. So that's sort of my answer from our perspective, which is, what is, in the journalism world, what does documentary bring that, that journalism in other forms doesn't?
Just a quick note, as a different way of thinking about it. For me, a documentary is as a filmmaker, it's a story that I tell where I have no control over what the characters are going to say. That's the way I think about documentary, as opposed to other kinds of media, right? So I have to tell a story, and I have to get people to say things that I want them to say to get the story told. Right. So that's kind of, when you immediately ask, that's what I thought. It's not about, oh, it's a nonfiction thing, oh, it involves real people. It's that there's a kind of improvised aspect to it, that and a kind of verisimilitude that I find really exciting. Of course, you were in your own movie, so you got to say all the things yourself. But
I was about to say, I definitely know how to make people say what I want to say. Yeah, I think that in terms of the idea of what a documentary is, there's different genres of documentaries, right? Like there's more investigative documentaries. There's verite. Not in every project I do, but in some projects tend to do more like narrative documentaries. Like if you look at my personal documentary, it's very scripted. Fundamentally, like we shot it, we got all the footage, and then we wrote it. We wrote it on paper. We brought the story alive fundamentally. So I think that there's definitely a lot of like different genres. But listen, the biggest thing is I guess you could say some people do recreations and stuff like that, but a lot of times I look at it as like there's something within it where you really are like using either found or shot footage versus like, stuff coming alive.
Yeah.
It's almost more about the audio. To your point, right? It's like the audio versus almost like the image, because the images you can really pick and choose whatever you want.
We are just going down the road, aren't we?
No, but that's a good point. Like just really quickly, I was just thinking, at least in our work at NMAP, my nonprofit, we do a ton of work that's sort of hybridized documentary, often for security reasons, right? So we'll do a ton of recording people's voices and then animating over them, or we'll even interview folks and we're sitting down to do a documentary interview, transcribe what they said, and get actors to read it. Is that stuff documentary? I don't know. It's interesting.
So I would say it is. I would say there's lots of different techniques. There's not like one technique that defines the genre, but for me it's something about making a claim to representing the real world. There's lots of different ways to do it, and part of it can be scripted or reenactments. A friend of mine defined documentary as, he said a documentary, if someone dies in a documentary, then they're actually dead. That's how you know it's a documentary, right? It's like and that doesn't mean it's objective, but it's your framing of being fact-based, of having like some relationship to the real world, I think. And one of the things I think that's very confusing for documentary audiences is that they want to, because there's this connection to the real or to facts or to a certain way of telling history, that there's a desire to say that that's objective. And I think like especially now with fake news and with lots of confusions about how we relay the truth through media, like there's a desire to be like, oh, documentary, like it's not objective, but it was never objective. It always comes from a place. It is always a story told from a place, I think, and that's always an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, I guess I would say though there is more and less objective, I think, but whenever I talk to students or audiences about watching docs or watching anything, is you always consider the source, think about what went into making it. If there's something that compels you about it, go read more. Never take anything as the full story, and any good doc filmmaker will tell you how much was cut out. But I do think that we can make decisions about how that ultimately impact how fair we're being. And I think there is more and less fair and more and less objective, as verified by whatever objective factors. But there still is science. There still is a record of some kind. There still is archival, whatever. There are ways of anchoring what we're doing to make them credible and to help people understand where it comes from and to question what's not there. So
do you think objective is different than true, or are those two things? Are those? What's the
I think they're
relationship?
both difficult concepts. I think they're all still relative. So I'm not disagreeing entirely with what you're saying. But I think there is not a fine or always a hard line between what is documentary and what is advocacy. There are often filmmakers who have a point of. Every film I've ever made, I've had points of view on the people, but I think every film I've ever made, all of the people, regardless of whether I agreed with their stances, all of those people would say, yeah, that was fair to me. That's who I am. That's what I'm about. That's what this situation was like for me. So is it true? Is it objective? Like, I'm trying to be fair, I guess. But no, the tough thing is truth is relative, but I would say if you know me or you know what goes into my process, then you still shouldn't take my film as the only version of anything. But I hope to be more trustworthy than some people who maybe do less homework or are. But I think we all have that in our power.
Go ahead.
I think responding to the idea of people only realizing that documentaries aren't objective is an interesting one, especially at this time. And I think, maybe coming back to law school or just leaving law school, it's something that I think is actually similar to the law. That the law a lot of times has this veil of objectivity when it clearly doesn't. That it is subjective. And I think that in both cases, it's important to kind of note that subjectivity, which I believe brings credibility to it as well, real credibility. I think there's lots of ways of dressing something up to make it look credible. But I think that acknowledging a subjectivity is something that's really important at this time in an age of fake news and something that I think was interesting, Adam, when you were introducing yourself, mentioned a distinction between documentary and advocacy. And I think that, for me at least, the work that I'm doing, I don't think of documentary. I very much think of it as advocacy, although I would try to be as truthful as possible.
Yeah, kind of going back to the original question, which I think answers more the truth objectivity. I think documentary for me is, it sounds strange to say it, but it's like fundamentally human, right? Like you're taking real stories and real experience, like you're telling an overall story, but you're telling it through real people and real stories and their experience of that. And I think truth is actually personal. I think to your point of like the law, I think that's the thing we learn in law school is there's not a right or a wrong. There's just there's just persuasion. So I think truth is personal, and I think documentary just feels deeply personal. That's what's different to me. Is it's like the art of just really human stories, and that's what I love about it.
So I'm interested to hear how your legal training has influenced your approach to storytelling. So clearly. So some of this has been alluded to, but it would be fun to go a little deeper in.
Switch it up, someone else. Go ahead.
Well, so I just had two thoughts. One of which was when I did Judging Jewel, which was the one about the security guard who found the bomb in Atlanta. Most of the archival that informed my understanding of the story and then became part of the film was stored in Jewel's lawyer's office in Atlanta, and so a lot of my prep was spent sitting in this conference room with stacks of these boxes, going through, trying to figure out what was in all these files and all these tapes and stuff. And I was like, oh, so this is what I would have been doing anyway. So and in some ways, I think whether we call it advocacy or whatever it is, I think a lot of documentary is kind of essay making. And so you are doing research and marshaling the facts and the elements and the pieces and building your piece or building your argument in ways that are very similar. So that was the first thought I had. And the second thought that I had was, well, actually, what drives me as a filmmaker is just, it's the same thing that drove me to law school, which is trying to understand the humanity behind policies, behind decisions, behind how we orient ourselves in society. And to me, that's very story-driven. And what we think about right and wrong is very much a function of the stories we know. And so why I became a filmmaker is the same reason I went to law school. I don't know that what I learned in law school has impacted me as a filmmaker as much as the part of me that wanted to go to law school was the same part of me that wanted to be a filmmaker.
Interesting.
I can answer this I think very easily because my law school experience was very much steeped in filmmaking. I interned for Adam. I was the president of the doc studio with Rebecca, and throughout my time thinking about the law, I was thinking about film, and so they very much kind of worked together for me in my mind. That and also the work. The subject matter that I currently am working on is law focused. Not that I think you need a law degree to understand it, but it probably is helpful.
Yeah, I think that there's clear sort of overlaps in skills in how you tell stories, how you take big ideas and overlay them with facts, and there's that level on which there is a clear sort of parallel between making a film and telling a story in any form. I think, though, one of the things that surprised me as I started going into the world of documentaries and in journalism was something I probably didn't fully appreciate as a law student, which was the extent to which the ideas of law, the theories that people have, actually do motivate what happens. We had made a film called Cheney's Law that was about how the vice president came to believe in the unitary executive theory, how he came to have a vision of what the American government could do, and how that vision of what the American government could do in many ways became what he believed the American government should do. And I think I didn't have that sense until really spending a lot of time working with the material making these films of the way that these sort of legal concepts, legal ideas, sometimes really big sort of theoretical types of ideas that you as a law student might say, why would this ever, matter? It's not really that practical. But in some cases, really motivate what happens in our government, in our country, and is an important part of the story that I think sometimes gets lost.
I think for me, it's definitely, I feel the same as Adam in terms of what led me to be a filmmaker, but in terms of after the fact, it's more for me, it's kind of like the hustle of it. It was learning how to, I feel like I go into the film world thinking about it from more of a business perspective at moments than a lot of other filmmakers do. So really thinking, one of the things I always, when I'm talking to young filmmakers, always say to them is I think you should think about your business plan, which I think fundamentally is very influenced by the fact that I went to law school. And so I'm kind of looking at this in terms of, yes, I want to tell stories, but what's my career going to be? And I did take the bar. And so I had that as a security blanket. And for years, I kind of always thought, well, if I can't support myself, I can always go back to practicing law. And I think I've gotten to the point now where I think, well, actually, I'd probably just go into become more of on the exec side or the TV side rather than being independent in terms of filmmaking. But I think that has really influenced me in terms of, and I really saw that we don't always distribute independently, but we've had some of these conversations in terms of like how I'm looking at a deal and what I'm trying to put together, and how I'm looking at the market is sometimes, I think, very influenced by my time in law school. Not that Harvard Law School really taught me how to make a deal, but that at least it gave me the ideas that I could, kind of have the confidence even to go through and know that, like, you kind of figure it out, right? Like, if you're smart enough, you can read a contract and you can, and so in certain ways, it was like that brief time I spent in, like, as a summer associate, actually, reading deals and negotiating deals really helped me, I think, as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Actually, more than law school, it was my 2 years at a law firm that didn't teach me the hustle. The hustle, I think, maybe, I don't know where that comes from, but just the kind of obsessive rigor of that kind of law practice, I think, really helped me both as an entrepreneur and a filmmaker. But in terms of how my legal training, I guess, kind of helped, I forgot exactly what the question was at this point, sort of supported my career as a filmmaker. In a way, my whole career has been about looking at this profession and trying to understand why it actually sucks so badly at communicating about itself, and why, as a profession, we suck so bad at telling stories, even though what we do is tell stories, especially litigators. So that's been interesting, and like taking this weird language we all learn in law school and figuring out how to use storytelling to translate it. Is sort of what I've done for the last 10 years. And so in a way, my career has been a bit of a reaction to my legal training.
I actually haven't thought about that, though. I mean, I think that's kind of the point, right? It's like a lot of not to overgeneralize, but a lot of like people who say like I'm a documentary filmmaker are not necessarily like the entertainment industry, just like anything else, is an industry, it's a business, right? And you're thinking about the marketing. A lot of people are thinking about the bottom line when they're thinking about distributing films. A lot of documentary filmmakers are not always thinking about that, right? So like you have some of these people who seem, at least on the surface, to have broken through, like a Morgan Spurlock, who has actually created like as a kind of initially an independent filmmaker, created like a larger production company that it actually seems to have like a business model. But a lot of times when you're telling stories and putting them out, I don't think that a lot of filmmakers are actually thinking. It's not about the fact that they suck at marketing as much as they're like just not thinking about marketing themselves and their careers as much as sometimes telling those stories and getting that message out.
You were saying lawyers suck at storytelling. You're
Yeah,
saying
that's
filmmakers suck.
You're saying documentary filmmakers, though.
No, what I'm saying is that well, I agree with what you're saying too, actually, because you were saying, I think you're saying, what I was saying is that I'm amazed at how we go to law school, right, and then suddenly we become part of this this profession that speaks a certain language, and we kind of it's sort of weirdly exclusive. And so much of my career has been about using the medium of film and storytelling to kind of break through that. Whereas what you're saying is something different, which I think is also really instructive. I don't want to derail this, but so I'm just curious, how many people in the audience are like interested? Are you here because you're kind of interested in pursuing some element of like film or production in your careers? Okay, so a few. No one else? So why are you here? No, I'm just kidding. But I think Lacey's point is really important. Like jobs like Mike's and Adam's are like pretty hard to come by these days. And like the film world has changed, I think, since you guys started. And since I started, I mean, now, the films we used to make for like $25,000 budgets back in 2009 can now be done at like higher levels of quality by any kid with a DSLR in any country with like a limited amount of training and have it look good enough, not amazing, but like things have changed, right? I'm not diminishing the work of professional filmmakers, but the need to be innovative in your own career, the need to like have a business plan and have a niche and have an angle is more important than ever. But there's also more opportunities than ever, I think, to do unique and interesting things.
More distribution outlets.
So many more, yeah. I mean, it's quite an amazing time. But you need to be a bit of a hustler to do it. I think to do it well. I mean, you could be very lucky and get jobs like yours, but I don't know. Do you guys agree?
I mean, there are very, very few places where you can have anything like the consistency of being able to work on the same type of projects over and over again. And I think it's actually a real shame because it took a long time to learn how to make films, and it takes a long time on the journalism side to sort of figure out what are the standards, what are the rules, how do you tell an effective story. And I think it's a shame that there isn't more of a structured world on the business side, not just on the education side, for people to really be able to spend years making films. I mean, I'm just tremendously lucky to be able to have, worked on whatever, more than 30 films, because you learn something doing that. But it is also a very exciting time with so many more, with so many more documentaries being made than there were certainly, 7 years ago, so many more places where they can be broadcast, where people can be exposed to them.
And people want to watch them. I mean, the audience isn't grown.
So it is exciting, and it's like, in my career, it's gone from people really saying, the world of documentary is over, especially on the world of long-form journalism. All of the networks were basically ending all of the series that used to do long-form documentaries. PBS was like, kept it going for a while, and it's only in the last maybe 7 years that all of these other platforms on cable and on the internet have opened up, where these types of films are being made once again, and I hope it lasts. It's not a bubble.
Yeah.
And I should just say, I don't have a job.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I was literally
yeah,
like, I don't
yeah,
have a job.
yeah. No, I mean it's. I have jobs.
But so sports. You're doing this as a.
So in one at a time. So.
Oh, cool. Okay, I didn't.
Yeah,
I misunderstood.
Yeah.
That's,
No. So and the only reason I even interject is to say I think that to do this stuff, for the most part, you're going to have to be pretty entrepreneurial one way or another.
So you're kind of making the point, actually, in a way. Yeah.
But I think that's as it should be. And I think all of these things we're talking about as the distribution changes and as the technology changes and whatever, like what I've always, and as I have interns who come in who can like run circles around me, having done it for 20 minutes, and they can do all the graphics and they can, not compose the music, but they really know so unbelievably much. But at the end of the day, I think what storytelling is still, whatever the format, whatever the tools you use to do it, good stories will always be good stories. And the things that, whether it's a 1 minute piece or the 5-part OJ series or whatever it is, the way it's told, the artfulness of it, the way you connect pieces and narrative, and that's not just true in documentary. And I think good stories will always find audiences. They're not guaranteed to be lucrative. But,
Can I actually add to that point? I think two things. I think number one, when you're talking about stories, and I think that is coming back, I think, to where the question maybe started about law and how our training at law. I think a story is just another form of persuasive communication, and I think for me, really sort of, and that's what being at law school teaches you, where are the flaws in your argument, where, do you need more diverse voices? And I think transposing that into, making documentaries, I think that's where I saw the value, is what are the voices that I'm missing? What is the perspective that I need to really tell this story? I mean, even if you're not trying to go with an endpoint, a story is still, you're still persuading someone, you're still taking them along for the ride. And I also wanted to point out, I think it's good to also talk about the various forms of documentary and the various uses, because you can do long form, and that's amazing, but you can also do, a 1 minute or a 3 minute piece and still have really strong uses for that. I mean, you can do something, that was something I was a really big proponent when I was on the doc studio, is I want to train students to have skills, because just having these skills are going to give you a leg up. One of the things I did my first summer, I did a legal internship in Zimbabwe, and I had a camera, and they're like, you have a camera? I can't remember who was talking about not wanting to do legal. It's I had briefs I was doing for them, which I just drug on and on and on. But the video work, I was let me do all of that, and it was exponentially more valuable to them. So I just also think in conceptualizing that there are different lengths, different forms, and different ways you can use them. I think it's really important to emphasize.
Yeah. We only have 10 minutes left, so I do want to open it up to questions from the audience.
Could you talk a little more specifically about the economics of making documentaries? How much projects cost, where the money comes from, how it's recouped, and how you can make a living as a documentary filmmaker?
Each of us will answer that very
Totally
differently.
does, yeah.
That's fun.
It's just long.
Most of my feature-length work has been primarily funded by foundations, at least to get it to a certain point, and then I would sell it to a distributor, or with my earlier work, sometimes I didn't sell it until I was at a film festival. Budgets for a feature-length documentary could range from very, very little if people are volunteering and you're not paying yourself to $500,000, $1 million, depending. So huge range of what it could take to produce a feature-length documentary, and huge range of what you could recoup on the back end. So it depends on how much money. If you're, if it's grant money, then you don't have to pay it back. If it's a pre-sales or a co-production deal, you're often paying back investors for a long time.
And break-evens are considered, and most docs are considered big successes, right? And most feature docs?
Well, it depends on how you budget it. Yeah. So are you paying yourself on the front end, or are you just waiting to be paid on the back end?
Does anybody have to be paid back? Like if you're getting foundations,
right.
It doesn't really matter if you break even because nobody gets the money back in the first place. I mean, I think that, so I think the first question when I think about like doing this is I think like, well, it's not just how much money is a film going to make or how are you going to fund it, but also how are you going to support yourself while you're doing it, right? Are you going to have enough budget from the beginning to be able to pay yourself to work on it? Like what's going to pay your rent? That's almost like a really kind of like a basic first question. And is what you're having coming in from the project enough to do that, or do you have to have some sort of fundamentally like side gig that is going to be able to do that? And I think probably for many of us there's been different forms of that at different points in our careers, in terms of how much that side gig was directly related to the main projects you're working on or not. That has certainly been my experience, where at times I knew that maybe I would be able to make money off of a project down the road, but at the time that project wasn't going to actually pay me anything. So I've done a fair amount of consulting, like creative business, strategic interplay that has been able to like actually help me keep the lights on fundamentally. And so in terms of the project, I think I'm probably similar in terms of long form projects that I've done. Most of them have been a combination of mostly grants, donations. I have gotten like, and then some of it being more institutional funding from like a PBS or a distributor, individual financiers, like fundamentally just piecing together the budget over time and kind of not having the whole budget before we got going, but actually doing it as we go. A lot of the longer form projects I've done have been like that. I am doing more short form stuff that I enjoy because it allows me to work on the long form stuff that, forget the finances of the long form stuff, they just take a while. So the shorter stuff has been good because it's almost like exercising the muscle. Plus I've found for that kind of stuff, a lot of times somebody will have a budget, and so they'll give us money to make it, and so that'll also be fees that we are collecting on making those projects, even though we have no ownership of them. So they're both like kind of fun-ish, and also you can make some money off of them. So I've been doing a lot of like shorter kind of work for hire projects for different outlets around. So that's been my main experience.
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of models, and it really often there's some level of scrappiness required to get it done, and you're, depending, you may be holding the bag for a while, so you have to figure that out. But then I've done some stuff. There are now, I've directed a bunch of pieces for the Clinton Foundation around the world that they had actually had a budget for, and were working with an agency, and so was hired as a proper director. And so there are opportunities like that too, but that's that doesn't happen every day.
And sorry, I just want to add one more thing. So on the back end, though, I think that's an important piece to talk about too, like how you can then kind of make money off of films. So I have done, I think probably you have as well, done a fair amount of speaking around the projects that I make as well. So like kind of once it's done, then we raise a whole nother budget a lot of times to do the outreach work, in which we are creating, how to utilize those projects, and there's a whole other revenue model around that, where sometimes that can almost be the easier way to raise money, whether or not it's going to the Ford Foundation. A lot of times once you have a film that's done and people can watch it, then they'll say like, oh yes, we'll give you money to go out and do this. But that's only if you want to do that kind of work. But I have definitely some of the distribution stuff, especially if you keep it independent, and you don't have people you have to pay back, that can be whether or not it's the educational space, non-theatrical screenings, speaking, that kind of stuff is a whole other world. And I would say, like, for people like ourselves, not to overgeneralize, but for people like ourselves who do have kind of this like multidisciplinary background, and a lot of times are working on projects around certain issues for certain reasons that we care about the impact, that can even be easier to kind of get speaking fees and that kind of stuff around.
Maybe one more response on this, and we'll move on to another question just to make sure. Or do you guys? Or maybe we'll just move on.
Well, it's sort of tied into that, and that is the new models of distribution with Netflix and Amazon and all that. So let's say you have something completed, whether it's a 10-minute piece or an hour-and-a-half piece or whatever. How does that work with in these new models? Because it used to be you go to film festivals or you sort of basically have to do all that, and you're not trying to make money. You're just trying to get people to see your piece, basically.
No, I mean, I think that if you did that film on spec and you're going to film festivals in hopes of selling it, that is still the same model. I mean, that's so whether it's Netflix or Amazon or Sony Pictures Classics or whoever, that's still if you haven't done any of these things that people have been talking about to form partnerships or get grants or get investors or do whatever, you're holding the bag. The way you're going to most likely get it out there is through film festivals, although depending on the length, if it's a Vimeo staff pick or like there are other ways of getting it seen. But if you're talking about a feature-length piece that's had hundreds of thousands of dollars put into it, likely the only way you're going to get the kind of buyer who will pay that kind of money for a film is it's likely through the festival circuit. Or
what if we remove the money part of this?
You just want to get it seen.
You want it to be seen.
But you still need an aggregator to get on Netflix or iTunes, so you still have to interface with the industry in some way. But you could, look at Coney 2012, right? That wasn't on Netflix, that was just on Vimeo, and there was just a very powerful, well-financed campaign. I guess there was both money and organization behind getting that film out. But there are some films that on their own that with really hardworking filmmakers can connect to their audience if it's an issue people really care about and they can connect to the right niche.
Well, I think also the question is, it's not just money, but it's also, if the point is you want people to see it, then the question is marketing. Because there's more and more distribution models, like Amazon. Amazon is doing one now, but it's Amazon Direct. Does anybody know? There's like Amazon has a new one where it's kind of this model that like filmmakers put it out there, and if you market it yourself, like you'll actually you get a certain revenue. I can't remember exactly. I think
it's Amazon Direct.
Amazon Direct, right? Yeah. So like Amazon has a new model. Like Vimeo is like kind of the same thing. Like there's a lot.
So it's kind of like the Spotify model, like it's up there and then.
I guess so. Yeah. Like VHX is one where you can
price
put
it
up your
yourself,
screen and price
right.
it yourself. So there's ways to like push, just put it on YouTube if you just want people to see it,
Yeah.
right? But the question is, how are you going to get people to market it? Like fundamentally, Netflix is like, Netflix is its own whole world, and Netflix is about, as a filmmaker, they're not going to just put something up, like they're either going to pay you or they're not going to pay you.
But to Lacey's point, I think the previous point, the important thing is like, how do you get it made in the first place? And if you're fortunate enough to have figured that out, then there's, yeah.
Right. And the marketing question, I think, when it's done best, which is one of the things Lacey does really well, is thinking about it not when you're finished with the film, but before you start the film, right? About the audience you're going to connect with and the way you're going to frame it and what you're going to do for your outreach and impact campaign. That can never be an afterthought, or it wouldn't be very effective if it were. It's got to be built into the production of the film, is the idea about how you're going to connect with your audience. One more question?
Just a quick follow-up. Is there representation of your industry? Do you have agents, or do you do this primarily yourself?
It depends, but there are agents who represent directors for unscripted or whatever. But I think for the most part, no.
I would say, do you have an agent or? Yeah, I think I don't have an agent. You know, I mean, I think it's also like, what do you want an agent for, right? Like, are you going, like, agents are good when you want to put yourself up for jobs a lot of times versus like, I think sometimes, or looking for distribution or I guess financing at a certain level. But I think it depends on the person and what you want your career to look like. So most people I know who have agents in this field around specifically documentaries are because they want to be put up for jobs. And
A
that,
lot of the best shooters have agents.
right, but I mean, if you're a documentary director, like it's
Director,
usually because
yeah.
you want to be put up for jobs and you want people, like you're going to production companies that might be doing series or stuff like that. Like I generally don't do that as much.
But sometimes we'd work with sales reps for individual films. So like we're not going to Estonia to sell the film, so we'd give a sales rep the ability to sell our film in lots of different territories and negotiate the deal and stuff like that. But that would be on a film by film case. They're not representing our work as directors often.
That's true.
Cool. Well, we are
There's
past.
one more.
there's-
We have two.
I currently work in film, and I still haven't started law school. I deferred, so I'll be here next fall starting. But one thing that I've heard and met with lawyers working in the industry or filmmakers, and I'm more in the film side now, is that people look at you as a lawyer when you walk through the door. And when you're looking for opportunities or partners, or Mike, when you're looking for a job at PBS, how did you work with that? How did you find a way to package yourself in a way that they would take you both as a creative and a lawyer? It's a question that I'm thinking about now before I'm even at the law school.
I mean, I think one of the advantages, especially in the world that I'm in, is that it sets you apart. So when, you know, a lot of people applying for the type of jobs that I was looking at are coming out of graduate school for journalism, you know, there aren't tons of people coming out of law school. And actually, I ended up sort of interning after my 2L year at WGBH, which is the home station of Frontline. And it was difficult for them to have me as an intern, and they sort of had to figure out a way around their own rules in order to be able to do it, because like you don't get college credit, those types of things. But coming from here, it was something that seemed worthwhile to them. And I think it also you also are able to bring something unique with that background. So like in that first summer that I was there, one of the things I did was organize a timeline that was a couple hundred pages of all of the interview material. And I think in a lot of ways that was what ended up getting me a job after I graduated. And that timeline was something that I had also learned working at the DA's office in Los Angeles on a big white-collar crime investigation of how they organized information was something that I ended up bringing to the project that I was working on, and it's still something to this day. We have somebody who's a researcher who's basically, their job is to make this now like a 1,000-page timeline on most of our projects with all of the interview material laid out chronologically. So I think some of the things you'll find that you can bring are those specific skills, and I think it also, it does set you apart if everybody's coming out of film school or coming out of journalism school, and this is something where you're coming from a sort of slightly different background and a slightly different perspective. I think people pay attention to that.
Can I jump in? I think it's also in how you kind of brand yourself, like how you introduce people. Like if you introduce people as a lawyer and you use kind of like, I used my law experience here, and I think a lot of people did, to like pursue my film interest. So, like, I helped start the doc studio. I made my own films. Like, if you looked at my resume, everything I did with law school was, like, related to this world. So it's I think it made a much easier entree. It's kind of like how you brand yourself and how you introduce yourself. And if you use your legal experience to just enhance your film experience, I don't think it's just a value add.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think in filmmaking, while it's value added and it sets you apart, it's also like your next job or your funding is going to come from your past work. Your work as a filmmaker is how, like, it's great that you have a law degree, but that's not probably going to make or break anything. And so, like, my advice to aspiring filmmakers is make as many films as you can, that you are get as much experience, hands-on, doing editing, doing shooting, doing whatever it is that you're passionate about, but also make sure you're telling the story yourself, that if what you want to do is be a director, then go direct. And, like, one of the great things now about the doc studio is there's really the opportunity to do that here in a meaningful way. And one of the wonderful things about short form work is that sometimes you can make things that aren't amazing. Sometimes you can set yourself up for a big challenge and not do it very well. But if you do it a lot, then, and hopefully some of it comes out good if you have some structure and some support and good resources. And it'll be those shorts, I think, that help launch you into the next part of your career.
Yeah, I totally, just quickly, as someone who hires a lot of filmmakers too, I completely agree. I don't really care if they're a lawyer or not. I just care what their work looks like. I think in the creative professions, you care about past work. Lawyers care a lot more about resumes when you apply for law jobs.
And I think to Dustin's point, it's just like you have to own it, right? Like, because I know myself, like coming out of law school, I was a little bit conflicted about what exactly I was going to do. And so I think though at the point that I just decided to like own it, I felt the same way within documentary and scripted work, where it's kind of like people want to place you in a box of being a documentary filmmaker, and sometimes you just have to like do it and own it and say, you know what, like I do this too. And so I just think that that's like the biggest piece. And I think coming in, the question I would ask myself if I were you is like, what do you want to get out of being here? Yeah, and exactly. That's almost the bigger question, because you can define it for what you want, but if you're already in it, what is going to Harvard Law School going to do for you? And I think that there's a lot of things that it can do for you. The question is, what do you want it to do for you? And I know for myself, obviously it's exciting being back for like in a gathering like this. Like I don't know the stats on it, but I would think that they haven't really done an arts gathering, previously. And I think that one of the reasons it's exciting is because it's owning the fact that this actually happens, which I feel like when I was in law school, which is going to be 15 years ago this spring, is like, it was like you knew people did it, but you had to like go and find them. Like Deborah Martin Chase, who's here, like finding her and meeting her, when I had just come out of law school was incredible for me connecting with her, because I was like, you're somebody who's done it, and everybody had this like path that was like their own path, and it was singular, and it's almost like nobody talked about it, right? When you were in these hallways, nobody talked about it, but so many people did it. So there's incredible, obviously, and I remember, I thought it was you for a second, but I don't think it was you. So when I was here, I asked somebody, why? Because I knew at that point, somebody I knew here, their brother was in film school. And I said, do you think when I graduate from here, I then now have to go to film school? And he was like, no, because honestly, people go to the film school the same reason you went to law school. It's like for the network. Mm-hmm. And so like just utilize the network. And I do think that the larger Harvard community, and specifically Harvard Law School, is an incredible network of so many people that do so many different things. And, plugging into that has been incredible. And so like, I know a bunch of the people on this because we have connected over time, even if we weren't in the same classes. And I think that that's the question more than anything you can ask yourself is, what do you want to get out of your time here? And then based on that, you will have confidence in how you define yourself when you walk in the room and get the most out of opportunities.
And not to kick that horse one more time, but I will, which is just because it's something that and not to undercut anything that anybody said, like the law school experience is amazing, but it's 3 years and a great deal of money that you could potentially make 2 feature films. And I've thought about it. And it's something, if you know what you want to do. And I think that reflects everything that everybody's saying. If you're coming here, know what you want to get out of it, whether that's a transition or it's you want to pursue a specific legal angle to filmmaking or whatever. You are going to be judged. If you want to be a filmmaker, people are going to look at your films. They're not, your resume won't.
But hang on, don't be afraid to change also, right? So know what you want, but you might come out of here thinking, God, like tax law is amazing. I'm not even kidding. You might love it. Like, be open to that stuff. That's not to give you too much piling on the unsolicited advice here, but.
Well, here's my one piece about the one things that I did when I was here is I really used the consortium. Like, I really used it. So, like, to the degree that, like, I told you I took that undergraduate film class here, but I also took, I wanted to take more, like, film, I took a music and law class at Berklee School of Music. And Berklee School of Music wasn't even in the consortia. Well, they weren't in the consortia, but I reached out to Berklee and I reached out to the registrar or whatever it is here, and I got them to approve it. So, and so that was, like, amazing, and actually connected with GBH because Jay Falkov, who was there who was like the head counsel at WGBH, like got me involved. So it's like, I would just say, like, come into this and look at Harvard as a community and a larger institution that you can also utilize in an amazing way.
Right. I'm going to pile on unsolicited advice. Also, I think, like, I don't know, the advice, I'm just going to recycle advice given to me, but I came in actually, like, having pretty strong thoughts that I probably wanted to be a filmmaker, and actually, like, very ambivalent about being here. And Dean Minogue gave me the advice at the time, and she said, great, if you want to be a filmmaker, do as much law as you can while you're here so that you are grounded in the legal world when you go outside to tell those stories. And my 2L summer, I interned at the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and my first film that I wound up selling to HBO was made of that experience, not of my internship experience, but of a story that I found when I was in West Africa, and I was grounded enough in international criminal law, had the connections in the network to go do it. So one of the incredible things about law school is you get to try on so many different things. You get to do different clinics every semester and see what tax law is like, or what human rights law is like, or criminal justice, and there really aren't that many opportunities in the world to get to try on so many different things, and so I do think that's a wonderful thing about law school. Okay, but we are way over time. I bet these guys are willing to hang out and talk if you guys have more questions. Thank you so much for all coming out.